Hi, Cara.
Hello, how are you?
Fine, how are you?
Good. I didn't get a response about being added as a co-host to share my screen,
Oh,
but I think
okay,
it looks like I can do it from here. So we should be fine.
okay. And one of them should be on in a minute.
Your co-host.
Got it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Dr. Scott, how's it going at the Walter Center?
Crazy, crazy. You know, Miss Smith is gone.
Yes, Gabby sent us a
That's
link
right.
in the card. Yeah.
So that's the biggest problem.
I know.
All of my graduate students are gone. I don't have anybody.
So what are you gonna do?
I don't know. I'm hoping that, they give me a temp for Miss Smith while they find somebody. And I've just had such a problem with three of the four graduate students on my Gates project are no longer at Howard. And
Oh,
I've been trying to hire another student since January, and they haven't been able to get the paperwork done.
sounds just like Howard.
Yep, nothing has changed since you left. So I do have one student I was able to hire. He's in African Studies.
Oh, okay,
Yes.
okay.
So thank God for him, 'cause otherwise somebody would be walking out.
You gotta hold on.
And then we're working with Dr. Grant.
Which Dr. Grant? Oh, Joe.
Yeah, that's what I said, Dr. Grant. Hi, Jalen.
Hello.
Hello, nice to meet you, I guess.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you both.
I need to find out from the tech people. The undergraduate student recorded her
Oh, okay.
presentation. And so I need to make sure they have it keyed up to run first.
Are they going to let her go first? Right?
Yeah, that's what it's supposed to be.
Okay.
So I've just got to make certain that I know she sent the tape last Friday, and there was a conversation back and forth about whether you all would take yours also, but then I said that I thought you all want to do yours in person, so I think it works out much better that way.
Yeah, I think it's fine. Who's going first, me or Jalen?
Who wants to go first?
Oh, it
I
does.
was gonna go by alphabet, so Jalen would go first. Last name.
Ah. Oh, first or last?
Yeah,
First
you first both ways. That's fine. What year are you in your program, Jalen?
Second year. You?
Oh, same.
Ah.
How's it going?
You already have your master's? Jalen?
Nope. No
Okay,
masters.
so he is behind you.
Cool. Yep. Second year. It's time for me to take comms, Dr. Scott. I can't believe it.
Wow. Well, you've already been thinking about your dissertation topic already, right?
Yes, I think I'm set on it. So that should be good. We have to take a year-long perspectives class next year. So
Yeah, I wish I could say we get the same thing at Temple, but it's kind of however your schedule rolls. Yeah.
got it. When do you take your comprehensive exams?
I take it in August.
Oh,
this
same.
year. Yep.
How many you have to take?
Two, one for my main field of American, and one for CP. So that's gonna be fun.
Yeah.
Cara, you have two also.
Mine's American in theory, political theory.
I think my alma mater is the only one that's still doing 4 exams.
For all
We had
the
to take exams in 4 areas.
Oh my. Oh.
that's torture. I'm not sure. Okay, so say that somebody's in the waiting room. I'm not supposed to be letting them in, is it?
No, the tech people supposed to let them in.
Yeah, 4 is a
I
lot.
hope, I hope that's one of the guys from the program committee.
I don't think so. It says an iPhone. Yeah. I
Yeah,
think-
so when students come to me complaining, I say, let me tell you what it was in my day. So I don't want to hear any complaints.
Yeah, I take both of mine a week apart. And hours, whereas Howard, we had the whole weekend, we get 8 hours. So 9 a.m. to 5 p.m.
Yeah, we did every other day.
Mm.
And so I tried to take my hardest one first. With my department chair, Dr. Mac Jones,
Yes.
and he kept coming back to look in the room while I was still there. And I said, I have a whole day.
Leave me alone.
Oh my, I think this was the runner up to the undergraduate, I think. I didn't know she was, oh my.
Do, do.
Yumina, is that how you pronounce your name?
Yes, it's Yamuna.
Okay, were you scheduled to present your paper?
There was a little bit of clarity I was wondering. It wasn't entirely clear. I believe that it was just being announced.
Yeah, okay, because Akuna was the first place winner, and she was supposed to present her paper, but she has recorded hers already. So let me get your last name so I have it here handy so I can introduce you.
Okay, it's Yamuna Turco, Turco, and I believe you were just announcing that I was one of the
Right.
runners-up. Okay, perfect. Thank
Right,
you.
and what was your university again?
St. Michael's College.
Okay. I thought that one of the program committee chairs was supposed to be here. The person from Advanced Net, do you know anything about a tape for the first paper?
I can look. Let me see.
So Amanda was in touch with the young lady last week.
Yeah, I don't see it in the run of show,
Ooh,
but let me check with Amanda and I'll have her text Tiffany and see if we can figure out how to get that.
okay, thank you. We only have 4 minutes. You know, I'm doing 2 conferences this week. And so originally the other conference is in person and it's over in Maryland. So originally I was supposed to check into the hotel, do my part, then run downstairs and supposed to be speaking down there. So about 1 o'clock this morning, I got a text and said, I think we'll move yours to Friday. I said, thank God.
Yeah, well, I got accepted to present a paper at NCOBPS, which is tomorrow. And then I had
Yes.
to prepare for this one too. So I was like, oh yeah, it also was the week that we had a recruitment. So the new admins to the program were here at the beginning of the week. So it has been a busy week for sure.
Yep, this is my spring break. So I worked harder in my spring break.
We have a late spring break. We don't have spring break till the end of the month.
Well, that's quite a few schools that started late have late spring breaks this year, but they were trying to keep us on schedule, so we'll have graduation the Saturday before Mother's Day, as is
yeah,
tradition.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, so I'm moderating 2 panels at NCOBPS. Then I find out that they are doing a presentation of my work. Nobody has called me to get, where did they get my CV from? I guess it was posted someplace. And do they know I have a chapter coming out of the book next month? Is that on the program?
Oh my God,
Why
what
don't people
chapter?
talk? I don't know why people try to surprise you and don't tell you what's happening.
What chapter did you have coming up for publication?
It's a book. A book is called Why Black People Should Train Police.
Oh, wow.
And it's by I think everybody's a Black author, a primary sociologist,
Do you use the police
criminologist.
connect with Noble?
The what?
Do you use your connects with Noble? Like, do you have any of the chiefs?
Oh, I'm still connected, because I have taught more in criminal justice programs than I have political science, because my dissertation was on the police, but it was really, political science. It's called The Politics of the Police. So yeah, I stay in touch with all of those things. And so I got called the last minute, a man couldn't complete his chapter or something. And so somebody said, well, call Elsie Scott. She can write this in a couple of days. So I don't even know what the chapter's gonna sound like.
And that's what you do?
Yeah, they gave me 2 weeks to get it done.
Oh, that's a quick turnaround.
Yes, but I had a co-author. So I got to be friends with this lady who teaches over in Coppin State in the criminal justice program. So that's my best bud now. Okay, what is
So,
one more? Yes,
What I was gonna probably say exactly what you were gonna say. The session is technically supposed to begin in a minute. The primary tech moderator hasn't hopped on, so I'll stay on to manage the waiting room and then answer any tech issues that you guys run into. Have not heard on the recording yet, but
okay, because I think he was supposed to I think Corey was on the distribution, Dr. Corey, what's his name, from California. He was supposed to have the tape. I'd really hate for that young lady to had taped her presentation and not be heard.
Yep, I
Because
will.
she did it plenty early enough.
Yes.
But I was not sent a copy, I was just on the email tree.
Got it. I will keep you updated.
Okay, because hers was supposed to be first because she was the undergraduate paper.
Yeah, we might have to pivot a little bit, but if I get that video in, I will for sure let you know.
Okay, thank you. See, Dr. Franklin is here.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Doing good.
You're doing better than us. We have a paper missing.
Oh, you mean a panelist or a paper?
Yeah, it was a young lady, the undergraduate student who won the award. She taped her piece and sent it in on Friday, but the lady who's our tech support said nobody gave it to her or told her about it.
Is anybody able to email her and have her send it?
I have to try to find it. Well, the tech lady's trying to find out because Amanda from tech, she was in conversation with the young lady, and I thought she sent her tape to her and to Dr. Corey. I thought Dr. Corey would be here so I could find out from him because he was on the distribution.
Okay.
But we're gonna have to start because we're 2 minutes late. So our support person, you're gonna give me a signal as to when we start?
You guys are good to go whenever you're ready.
Okay, we have people in the audience.
I think we've had a couple trickle in, and I'll just keep admitting them as I see them in the waiting room.
Okay. These are all the names of the people who are here in the participants list,
Yes, ma'am.
because we were expecting 2 sponsors to be here from Democracy Fund. Unless they had problems getting in. Okay, well, we only have one visitor now, and that's Dr. Franklin.
That's all right. Todd's here too.
Oh, okay, well, I was about to say, where is Dr. Shaw? His student is here.
Hello, hello.
Hello, how are you?
Dr. Baptist is here too.
Okay, well, we'll get started then. So we have some people in the audience. Okay, good afternoon. My name is Elsie Scott. I am the director of the Ronald Walters Leadership and Public Policy Center at Howard University. And I want to welcome you to this session, which is on issues of continuity in government. We were fortunate, NCOBPS and the Ron Walters Center, we were fortunate to connect with the Democracy Fund and started talking with them about the continuity of government project, of which I'm serving along with Dr. Nadia Brown. Both of us are on this commission looking at continuity of government. And the commission was put together, it's a bipartisan commission. It was put together to look at issues relating to continuity of government, primarily driven by the pandemic. But as we have met, there have been other issues that have come to the front. So what we decided to do was to do a national competition of students who would be interested in writing about any of the issues related to continuity of government, and especially looking at it from an Afrocentric perspective. So Democracy Fund was excited about that. So they sponsored this competition. And we are very fortunate to have with us the 2 graduate student winners. And if we can get the check worked out, we also have a tape recording of the undergraduate paper that was the winner. And we have the first runner-up is with us today. Her name is Yamuna Turco, and she attends college at St. Michael's College. So we want to thank her for participating in the contest and thank her for joining us today. And so we were originally supposed to have the undergraduate paper presented first, but somehow the tape is missing. If we get the tape before the session is over, then we will run her tape. So our undergraduate winner was Akuna Chilaka, and she is a senior majoring in political science and public policy at the University of California at Santa Barbara. And so we are very proud of her also, and hopefully we can hear her presentation. But we have with us today our 2 graduate student winners. And so I'm going to introduce both of them and then we'll have the presentations. Our first presenter will be Jalen Campbell, and he is originally from Boston, Massachusetts. He's in his 2nd year of graduate school at Temple University, working on a doctorate in political science. And his focus is on American politics with the subfield of comparative politics. He's especially interested in studying autocracy in the United States and ways to address that problem. And on that topic, the goal for his dissertation is to analyze the presence of democratic backsliding in American politics at the federal level. So I guess this contest was right down his alley. We're happy to have him here. And his paper title was Presidential Backsliding. And our second graduate student winner is Cara Mcrae. Cara Mcrae is in her second year. She's a second year PhD student at Brown University. And her research subfields are American politics and political theory. Her research interests broadly encompass race and identity, ideology, and representation. Cara has worked at the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies to co-author the 2018 Racial Diversity Among Top U.S. House Staff report, which she co-authored with me. And most recently, she worked on the report card on Black Chiefs of Staff to Cabinet Secretaries in the Biden administration. She holds a master's degree in Black politics from Howard University, a bachelor's degree from political science and English from the University of South Carolina, where her proud undergraduate professor, Dr. Todd Shaw, is joining us today. And her paper is titled Electoral Refusal and the Demobilization of Young Black Voters. I hope I got that right. Okay, we'll start with Mr. Campbell, and you have take about 15 minutes. And for those of you who are listening, you can write your questions in the chat, and we'll try to have some dialogue after we have the second paper. Jalen.
Okay, thank you. So let me transition us to my PowerPoints. Oh, sorry, there we go. Sorry about that. Okay. All right, sorry about the technical issues, but hello everyone. My name is Jalen Campbell, and today I'll be presenting on presidential backsliding in the United States. So first, my research question. How do presidents contribute to Democratic backsliding in the United States? Much of the scholarship on American politics views Donald Trump as the nation's first autocratic president, yet there is no insight into the action of previous presidents qualifying as backsliding or autocratic. The main finding of my research is that Democratic backsliding from the American presidency is not entirely limited to Donald Trump. Other presidents have committed actions of autocracy and backsliding, and this research aims to address it and its effects on the American political system. As an overview, I will give a background on Democratic backsliding using comparativist literature before transitioning to Americanist literature to look at its effects in the United States. I'll define what presidential backsliding is, along with the measure that I used to study it, ASD, before transitioning to my theory and my case selections. And then I will close out with my case study of Andrew Jackson, his measure of majoritarian support, which is a component of studying presidential backsliding, along with the results and conclusions of my study. So starting off, Haggard and Kaufman provides the most applied definition of democratic backsliding, that being it's an incremental erosion of democratic institutions, rules, and norms that results from the actions of duly elected governments, typically driven by an autocratic leader. Among the comparatives in literature that I read for my project and for this presentation, The most recurring factors of Democratic backsliding are polarization, the presence of a democratically elected autocratic leader, the ability for that autocratic leader to exploit polarization in terms of the media and or Congress or any legislative branch, and incremental backsliding of various democratic institutions and roads, such as fair and free elections. In terms of backsliding in the United States, scholars have shown that the presence of backsliding in American politics is the result of, one, our late transition to a full democracy in 1965. While there's been some debate whether or not our true democratization level achievement was in post-Civil War, like in 1865, or with the inclusion of women suffrage in 1919, most scholars on American literature, on American politics, state that 1965 is the definitive date. Second is the polarization and radicalization of political parties, specifically on the issues of economics and in some cases race, as that drives our political parties into into the various ideological directions currently held. Conflicts of civic membership, who qualifies as an American citizen and what rights do they give? Are they allowed? And American voters engaged in anti-democratic behavior, specifically, as Grossman states, what liberal Democrats see as backsliding, majoritarians, who I'll address in this presentation further on, see as consistent with democracy, which mutes public backlash against power grabs. Specifically with majoritarians, they see any act giving more power to the executive branch or as equivalent to democracy, as that's providing more for people. What is presidential backsliding? Presidential backsliding are actions committed by the president that contributes to the erosion of democratic laws or institutions. Examples include executive orders, presidential vetoes of key legislation and policies, such as renewal of the Freedmen Bureau in the case of Andrew Johnson, or in a sense, doing nothing, as this political cartoon of Chester A. Arthur demonstrates. So the new measure that I use to study presidential backsliding is ASD, linked specifically to presidential duality. This theoretical concept shows that any actions of the president can either promote democratization in America, a democratic side, or restrict democracy in America, an autocratic side. Presidential backsliding is observable through these criteria of the autocratic side of duality, ASD: majoritarian support, populist rhetoric, authoritarian behavior, whether normal or racial, politics of leadership structures, and electoral process. So to measure each component of ASD, these are the steps that I take. For majoritarian support, I look at the percentage of popular votes during elections, specifically in regions that the president has maintained a majoritarian base or has their baseline of supporters. Next, for populist rhetoric, I use any piece of literature written by presidents that address the public or Congress that centers around garnering support for their policies or agendas. For authoritarian behavior, I look at Levinsky and Ziblatt's 4 indicators of autocratic behavior that was transcribed in their book, How Democracies Die. And these same measures is used by Parker and Tully in their study of racial authoritarianism in the United States. They just apply it, they take those 4 indicators and apply it specifically to racial inequality and racialized politics. While for the politics of leadership structure, I use Stephen Skowronek's typology of political time, and you measure them based upon if the president's maintained party control over the House and Senate, to see how their main control of the whole government was fermented. And for the electoral process, this is a 4-point measure scale measuring how the president's gained the office. As CP and American literature states, an autocratic leader needs to be democratically elected to achieve the position. And as we've known from recent history, not every election in the United States is conducted or ends in the same manner. If a president gains both the electoral vote and And the popular vote, in any normal case, that's a 4, they get a 4, that's a normal electoral victory, then that's a democratically elected president. If they gain a 1, which is the opposite end, they mainly gain the office through electoral college, which to some people in my study of American history shows that Americans have very mixed reviews or mixed values when a president just wins the election via electoral college. So for my theory is periods of backsliding in the United States are the result of successful presidential backsliding. As President Harry Truman states, the buck stops here in terms of actions committed actions committed by the president or legislation passed by the president. The same could be said as the buck starts here with backsliding in the United States. As shown by this table taken by Poly 5, areas that in Poly 5, periods with a decline in the polity score, which is from 1829 to 1854, 1877 to 1967. These are the periods that I believe serve as the best case for understanding presidency's effects on backsliding in the United States, specifically whether it's at the start of a period or they help continue it on in the interim in between these years. And for our first case, is Andrew Jackson, our 7th president from 1829 to 1837. His main case of backsliding is through his influence and creation and passing the Indian Removal Act, which removed 5 Native American nations out of the Southeast United States to what is now Oklahoma. In terms of his majoritarian support, Jackson builds his base upon being the president of the common man. He's the first president not to be from a revolutionary state among the 13 colonies. He's a self-made man, born in a log cabin. He builds up his fame because of his war record in the War of 1812, and he's able to maintain popular support among the people in the 3 elections that he runs in, even though he loses the election of 1824. His populist rhetoric surrounding the act, both seen in his message regarding Indian relations and his 3rd annual message to Congress, his rhetoric is used to make it appeal to his supporters or anyone on the fence on removal, that it's a benevolent act, that it's the only alternative that best suits them, best suits any humanitarian interest in protecting Native Americans. For his authoritarian behavior, Jackson chose not to enforce the ruling of the Supreme Court case Worcester v. Georgia, which stated that the Cherokee Nation did not have to move out of their lands and they were not subject to state, local, or federal laws. In his removal process, 352 white Americans who had intermarried into these Native American nations were also forced to move, thus violating their rights as American citizens in one shape or form. And in terms of his racial authoritarianism, Jackson's whole appeal in his rhetoric is he basically undermines the principles of Native American sovereignties and whatever rights they were guaranteed via the Constitution in terms of how Congress regulates with Native Americans and what protections that are offered. As a political leadership structure, Jackson had a politics of Reconstruction, meaning that he had the ability to not dictate, but use his authority without much headache or blocking from Congress. Throughout his 8-year presidency, he enjoyed party control for 6 out of those 8 years, so he had a lot more room of flexibility. In terms of the election process, in both 1828 and 1832, Jackson had won the popular vote as well as the Electoral College vote, giving him a score of 4. And as a side note, here's an example of this majoritarian base. As you can see in comparing 1828 to 1832, Jackson's popular votes had increased following the Indian Removal Act. As a most interesting note, while he had a majoritarian base in Tennessee, North Carolina, Louisiana, Illinois, Indiana, Pennsylvania, Alabama, Mississippi, he gained an increase in votes in Tennessee, Georgia, and Alabama. These were the states directly affected by the Indian Removal Act. So by enforcing this act, his majoritarian base gave him support for a 2nd term. So in terms of my results, the results show that Andrew Jackson's ability to pass the Indian Removal Act was successful as he met all of his components, all the components of ASD. In my larger essay, in my further analysis, I ran a test with both Rutherford B. Hayes and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, specifically looking at the acts of the Compromise of 1877 and Executive Order 9066. Rutherford B. Hayes got a score of 1. He was primarily elected via the Electoral College. His further cementing of his win was done through the Compromise of 1877, which basically gave him the presidency in exchange for ending Reconstruction by withdrawing federal troops. Because of his electoral win, Hayes did not enjoy the same level of majoritarian support as both Jackson and Roosevelt did. His politics of leadership was a politics of disjunction, as he was hammered and basically blocked by a Democratic House and Senate that did not allow, that even questioned his ability or to be president, as some view that he didn't win the election fair and freely. While he did use populist rhetoric to try to envision his view of Reconstruction, it failed, as he didn't have a majoritarian support or a base. And his act of autocratic behavior is by his acceptance of the Compromise of 1877, instead of just letting the wheels of politics hammer out the result, the closely knit election of 1876. If he had just went with the process, maybe he might have gained a power base and some levels of support. While for FDR, for 9066, he didn't use any populist rhetoric to support his actions. I've looked throughout various archives to find any speeches, fireside chats where he references this act, and nothing occurs. So he's unable to wow his public base or majoritarian base for the support. While he did have many Americans on the West Coast passed something asking for removal of Japanese Americans, he did not. When it came to 1944, as I'll say in my conclusion, he saw a decline in votes along the West Coast, with only Washington and California giving him an increase in votes. What FDR and Hayes shows is that when ASD is lacking in one field, whether you don't have a politics of Reconstruction, or maybe you don't have a majoritarian base, or lack of presidential or populist rhetoric, your ability to backslide is either punished automatically with no electoral wins or populist support in terms of Hayes, or in case of FDR, while you might get in FDR's case, a 4th term or a 2nd term, your popularity might suffer a decline. Further research on presidential backsliding that will be conducted on presidencies within the time periods of the decline in polity scores, along with the presence of the autocracy scores. Specifically, other presidents that I'm interested in studying are Andrew Johnson, Woodrow Wilson, along with LBJ, who's often considered to be, who was in power during 1965 when we achieved the rank of a full liberal democracy. While this project looks at just presidential backsliding and presidential duality in the case of the American government, this level of backsliding and duality, in my view, can be applied to other executive offices at the state and local levels. There have been literature that looked at the backsliding within American states, specifically red states that are governed by a Republican governor or a Republican legislative as well. This same thing can be applied to cities ran by autocratic or democratically backsliding mayors. And it could also be applied to other nations abroad in terms of their executive branch, whether at any level.
Thank you, Jalen. We'll ask people to put comments and questions in the chat. And Jalen, if you can start looking at the ones that are already there. So when we come to the Q&A section, you will be ready to respond. So we have found the tape for the undergrad, but we're going to go with Cara's paper next. And then after she presents, we'll run the recording of the undergraduate paper. And then what time we have left, we'll engage in discussion. So our next presenter is Cara Mcrae from Brown University.
Hello. As Dr. Scott mentioned, my name is Cara Mcrae, and I'd like to take this time to thank NCOBPS, the Democracy Fund, and the Ron Walters Center for this award and this initiative. My research interests are in American politics and political theory, so I see this paper as kind of the intersection of those two subfields, and it's entitled Loss, Electoral Refusal, and the Demobilization of Young Black People. So Danielle Allen is a theorist who argues that loss is central to democratic politics. And as we know, with 2020, though we had COVID ravaging the nation, of course, one thing that did not stop was the police brutality against Black and brown bodies, which also resulted in protests across the nation. And so these protests of 2020 were like a result of this collective trauma at work, this anger, this fury, this grief felt not only as Black men were being killed, but also Black women and Black children. And so we have Dante Wright and Kaya Bryant and Adam Toledo, and the list goes on and on and on, those we know and those we don't know. And so one thing that I've realized and was thinking about as I took Juliet Hooker's taught a class on political loss is how we talked about it's unjust to ask Black citizens to peacefully acquiesce to a system that makes them perpetual losers in the US democracy. So there's an article in the Time, and it has this quote that says, young African Americans don't have confidence that the system will or can function in a way that will advantage their lives. They have no evidence or little evidence that the system will improve their lives. When they engage with the system, more often than not, it is adverse. In some ways, it is destructive and life-threatening to them. And as a result of that, they have little inclination to engage with that system. And there was even a study conducted by Brandon Davis in 2020, and he was saying, even if you don't have any direct interactions with the police, any that you're affected by directly, like any of the interactions that's negative will have a negative impact on the way that you choose to politically engage. So what I saw happening here, so what I see happening, like in my own personal experiences, is that there are people who are just less willing to engage with the political system as a result. And so I argue that the loss of Black life at the hands of the carceral system is threatening the state of democracy by creating electoral refusal, which is this wave of demobilization in electoral politics among one of the most dynamic groups of the electorate. And so is loss always mobilizing? So there is a subsection in the literature that says by Anne Seshkovich and J. Paul Ubin, who say that collective trauma is healing, it's therapeutic, and it's best addressed like as an opportunity to start a new beginning. And we see that, right? When we see that when these women who lose their sons or their children to police brutality, they start an organization called Mothers Against Police Brutality. We see Representative Lucy McBath, a congresswoman from Georgia, who after losing her son, Jordan Davis, because he was killed at a gas station for playing his music too loud, she is spurred to then run for office. We see Leslie McSpadden, who is the mother of Michael Brown, running for office, city council in Ferguson, Missouri. We also see Sabrina Fulton, which Trayvon Martin's mom, also running for city council in Florida. So we see and we know that mobilization happens, except I think that we have to think about the other side, right? Like grief is two-faced, and sometimes it's heavy, Sometimes it's isolating and the trauma is just too unspeakable. It's like unrepresentable. And there's sometimes no strength or no action to actually do something about it. And so what I see is that with the proliferation of social media, with the 24 hours news cycle, we can't run away from it. It's hard, especially as young Black people who use their cell phones to record. It's constant, it's incessant. And not only that, there's no consequence for those who continue to murder these Black and brown bodies in the streets. And this issue is not an issue of city. We see this happen kind of nationwide. And I think that this incessant loss has kind of spurred this reluctance about democracy, about justice, and like the electoral system more broadly, right? There's no legislation to do anything, though there have been instances in the House where they have been attempts to kind of curb this and sponsor legislation. They have been largely like unsuccessful in becoming federal law. And so Juliet Hooker wrote an article in 2020 entitled Black Lives Matter and the Paradoxes of US Black Politics. And she recognizes that these democracies must find methods to help citizens deal with a conflict between their politically inspired desires for total agency and the frustrating reality of their experiences. So we know from the past, we know from the civil rights movement that typically like young people were always on the line, always on the fight for justice, always protesting and always in the streets. But what she noticed happening is there's this frustrating reality is that things are not changing. Like we have been in the streets in 2012 for Trayvon Martin, again for 2014 with Michael Brown, again in 2020. And as these Black bodies are continue to be murdered or being jailed, like there is still nothing going on, and that there's some reckoning that we must have to do. So building on Vicky Hughes's reparative refusal, I theorized this idea of electoral refusal. And so I think that this devastating loss that's happening plagues the Black community in a way that's creating this wave of electoral refusal. And so although I did not work on a political campaign this past election term, I felt like I was doing my due diligence as a political scientist by talking to my peers, talking to people, asking if they were registered to vote, if they were voting, and there was just kind of apathy there. There was lack of excitement about the candidates at large, and people just literally felt like there was no point, right? Like that my vote is not mattering because nothing is changing. And there were even tweets by like Diddy and the Ice Cube tweet listed here that says, hold the Black vote hostage until one of them comes with a Black agenda that we're satisfied with. It's not our job to fix the country's mess until we fix our mess, and excuse the language in the platform. Those Ice Cube's words, not mine. So what's happening is that these young Black voters, right, they're seeing these empty words in their promises, and they're realizing like, the Democratic Party or these candidates can't just assume that we're going to show up to the poll for them every single time. I had people tell me like the Democratic Party needs to court Black voters, especially young Black voters, the same way that they would any other demographic group. And so I think, you know, until not only are Black men again being murdered, there's Black women, there's Black children, they're all being murdered without consequence. So it's like, why would I engage? Why am I voting? Nothing is changing. And so even Dr. Kathy Coleman has this quote here that says, they've seen the election of Black mayors. They've seen the election of the first Black president, and they've also seen that their lives have not changed. So yes, more Black mayors are being elected to cities. Yes, we had the election of President Barack Obama, but yet we still continue to see the same thing happening without any repercussions for those who have done so. And so what I did was I looked at voter turnout rate, and this data is from the census. I know that there's some critique of using the census because of their over-reporting, but they are the only source that I have found to disaggregate the data by both age and race. So if we look at the reported voting turnout between Blacks and non-Hispanic whites from ages 18 to 24, from 2008 to 2018, we see there was a 52.3% turnout in 2008, 2012, 45.9%, 2016, 40.2%. And so we all know people tend to vote less in midterm elections, but even in these presidential years, there's a consistent downward trend of turnout among voters age 18 to 24. And so when we're looking in comparison to white non-Hispanic voters, we start off at 48.3% in 2008. That goes down to 41.4% in 2012, but it picks back up in 2016, almost 45.8%. This constant downward trend. So if we also look at the age 25 to 44, so I will say that I don't necessarily agree with the grouping of 25 to 44. I feel like that encompasses a wide generation, right? I would probably aim for like 25 to 35. But we still see kind of similar voting patterns, whereas it's not as obvious as in the range with 18 to 24-year-olds. So you still kind of see this lower voter trend where whites are turning out higher than Blacks, except for in 2012, which is not surprising given that President Barack Obama was the president. And so in table 3, here is a voting age of Blacks by age. And as we all know, older Black citizens turn out in rates higher than young voters. That has always been the case. And we're looking at like 66% in 2008 compared to 52.3% in 2008. But again, Barack Obama. But then when we start looking at 2018, there's 58.4 of 65 to 74 years old, while only 29.6% in 2018. And so there was a field experiment conducted by Jamil Scott, Melissa Michelson, and Stephanie DeMora, who, when they did this field experiment to examine Get Out to Vote campaign in DC, and they actually found out that Black communities should make the distinction between the various subsets of the Black electorate. Because what they found is that what is encouraging and making these older Black citizens turn out is actually not the same things that will motivate these young Black voters. And so then it's like, okay, what about 2020? So 2020 election, highest presidential turnout election there. Cool, numbers were high for everybody. But what I argue is still that the percentage increase among Blacks were still less than it was for any other race. So if we look at, there was a 21.7% increase from 2018 to 2020 when looking at the chart on the left from 18 to 24 years old, and only a 14.8% increase among Blacks. That was only slightly higher than Hispanics, which increased 11.3%. And so then I'm not sure what happened with my third bar graph on the first graph. But if we look at the bottom right-hand corner, we can even visually see that there was only a 10% increase in from November 2018 to November 2020 between the age groups of 25 to 44. So yes, we should celebrate the election of 2020 and the higher turnouts, but it's still that Blacks are turning out at a smaller percentage rate. And so I know everyone asked, but what about the activists, the work of activists? What about Georgia? And so I think we have to acknowledge the work that LaTosha Brown and Stacey Abrams and their organizations and all the other Black women and men who are on the ground actually doing the work, registering people to vote, which I think is really great. And they were successful. But I think that we have to notice that these two women, they're more privileged. They have access to resources, and there's a greater buy-in to the political system to mobilize these electorate. Also, we have to acknowledge that these two women were also losers in their different pursuits, their electoral pursuits. And even the fact that they lost could be another reason that more young Black voters are unwilling to engage with the system. Because it's like, Stacey Abrams, this great, amazing woman, was able to register all these Black people to vote, and yet the election was still stolen from her. All these things that they were able to do, and they still did not win. So why exactly should I care, right? Why should I vote? Why should I engage? And so I think that until Congress and President Biden actually deliver on these campaign promises or sponsor legislation where we feel as if Black life is protected, regarded, respected, or there is legislation. Actually, I know the House was able to pass the George Floyd Policing Act, but until the Senate actually does something and there is legislation that's protecting this, I think that we'll continue to see this downward trend. So in conclusion, I argue that as young Black citizens are forced to continuously reckon with such the devastating loss of the cultural system and the government's failure to do all they can to protect Black citizens, that subsequent years will yield a declining turnout among young Black voters, posing a great threat for the continuity of the US government. So by not voting, non-voters are showing that their voice or their lack of is their ultimate strength. And this should raise great alarm, as we already know that voting rights are being threatened by right-wing politicians, by like voter ID laws and stricter laws. Of course, the John Lewis voting right has yet to be passed. So there's all these things here at work. And so I think that as political scientists, it's imperative for us to acknowledge this quotidian behaviors within these underrepresented groups that threaten the preservation of the representative form of government, for the future depends on the voters of today. So thank you. I'm looking forward to questions and engaging with the work.
Couldn't get myself unmuted. Okay, we want to thank Cara and Jalen, mixing the names together. And what I would like for the tech people to run the tape of the undergraduate paper. Somehow I don't have it in my notes, the name of the paper, but we're going to run that and then we'll take Q&A because we still have time. Tech support, are you going to be able to run the tape?
Yes, ma'am. I'm just getting it all set up.
Okay, thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Akuna Chalaka, and I want to welcome you all to the 53rd Annual National Conference of Black Political Scientists in this specific session on issues related to continuity of government. I'm so grateful to have learned about this opportunity from my political science department at University of California, Santa Barbara. Specifically, my TA Felicity Stone Richards brought to my attention the paper competition on continuity of government that NCOBPS and Howard University's Ronald Walter Center were sponsoring. I was so excited to discover an organization that prioritized young African American scholars, so I gleefully participated in the paper competition. I'm so happy to have my paper be selected and subsequently recognized. Thus, to give this conference a better understanding of my background and interpretation of continuity of government, I'll present major highlights from my paper for this session. The title of my paper is Citizens United Against Democracy: How Trumpism and the January 6th Insurrection Challenged Established Norms on Continuity of Government. For this presentation's outline, I'll quickly start off with a little background about myself, and then I'll go into continuity of government's rich history, and then discuss how January 6th basically infringed on continuity of government. So finally, my introduction. To your left, you'll see my image of myself. Sorry that I'm not on camera. I came down with a little bit of a cold, but hopefully this will suffice. I am a fourth-year undergraduate student at University of California, Santa Barbara. My majors are political science and history of public policy and law, and my big interests are in American history and politics and racial equity and public health policy. And I have career aspirations in political advocacy and federal policymaking that not only ensures the advancement of social justice, but greater health equity. And going off of health equity, I do see that as like a really central point for a lot of communities in the United States, specifically marginalized communities like African Americans. And I think that with politics and policy, those are great avenues to ensure health The Federal Emergency Management Agency, also known as FEMA, defines continuity of government as a coordinated effort within each of the executive, legislative, and judicial branches to ensure that governance and essential functions continue to be performed before, during, and after an emergency. So essentially, continuity of government programs prioritize the stability of government institutions amid crises. Indeed, continuity of government has been ingrained in the bureaucracy for centuries. As you can see, in 1794, during the early Republic era, the presidential line of succession was established. And this was really emblematic of a continuity of government program, because its aims were to minimize any foreseeable disruptions to a functioning government if a president were unable to lead. And then in 1894, during the Gilded Age, following numerous presidential assassinations of figures like Lincoln, Secret Service protection for presidents became enacted. And then during the Cold War era, specifically the mid-20th century, late 1940s, early 1960s, you see a lot of continuity of government. You see a lot of those policies become more enacted. For instance, JFK issues Executive Order 10952, and this Cold War era policy affirms America's commitment to continuity of government programs that guaranteed a continuing function of civilian political authority during crises. And I find that quote that I highlighted, civilian political authority, pretty crucial, because it shows that even in its beginnings, continuity of government did want to maintain a balanced, durable government, but also prioritize the American masses in that struggle, in that quest, I should say. And then in 2002, right after 9/11, the Department of Homeland Security is created, and this agency is essentially a key part of continuity of government, as its secretary is tasked to direct and oversee the effective implementation of continuity of government programs. Of the many national crises that happened throughout America's history, 9/11 is undeniably the most significant, especially to continuity of government, as following this event, many policies that contributed to the continuity of government program happened. And I find the most pivotal one being continuity of government readiness conditions. President George W. Bush ratified COGCON in the 2007 National Security Presidential Directive 51. It's akin to the readiness system that comprises DEFCON. On the slide, you'll see the image of the COGCN levels listed from 4 to 1, 4 being the least catastrophic and 1 being the most catastrophic. Considering continuity of government's rich history, how did it become challenged in recent years? Understanding its history, I find that during the 9/11 reforms to continuity of government, I find that's when you started seeing a little bit of controversy arise, because these post-9/11 continuity developments were essentially emphasizing exclusively government higher-level actors that would execute crucial political continuity programs over the larger masses. So with the readiness program in Directive 51, that's essentially a top secret policy. People outside of the non-bureaucratic masses, essentially the American people, wouldn't really know much about it. So they're kind of closed off from it. And then alongside this newfound top secret approaches to continuity of government led to the non-bureaucratic American masses to feel disconnected from their leaders. I find that such disconnection inevitably led to certain segments of the population in the post-Bush era feeling disillusioned and subsequently disdain for the political apparatus, an apparatus that was now seen as alien and an unrelatable entity. And these sentiments ultimately allowed for continuity of government to be temporarily impeded in future eras, exemplified with the Donald Trump presidency between 2016 and 2020. I have a quote from my paper that analyzes the January 6th insurrection and Trumpism's, their overall discontentment with continuity of government and how they infringed upon it. I'm going to read it right now. The insurrection was indicative of Trump and his supporters' overall disregard for government norms and larger continuity of government. January 6th further showcased Trumpism's newfound reach over certain segments of the civilian masses, people who already subscribed to Trump's ideology and subsequently held and established discontentment over legitimizing government authority. Thus, the aggressive mobilization to overturn the certified election results proved that to Trumpists, the notion of safeguarding governments was infeasible, as government actors not declaring Trump as the electoral winner seemingly proved the political entity not representing or advancing their values and interests. So in essence, you had these certain segments of the American people that already had an adverse reaction to government forces under Trump's presidency. And then come 2020 and the election happens and Biden is declared the winner, they are already feeling a certain way towards government entities. They already feel like they're not legitimate, thanks to Trump's own dogma throughout his candidacy and his actual presidency, and then those years of brewing discontentment with government entities. So couple all of those forces together, you get to January 6th, where by then, once they don't declare Donald Trump the winner, Trump's supporters and Trump himself felt a need to devalue the government and essentially act as it's delegitimate, pretend it's delegitimate because it doesn't advance their interests. Indeed, federal actors' response on January 6 was swift and immense, sharing one key goal: to defend the democratic form of government that the insurrection so blatantly threatened. So in the paper, I highlight examples of continuity government programs being implemented during the insurrection, and on the slide, I highlight two of those examples. So following deliberation with politicians like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, acting Secretary of Defense Chris Miller activated the National Guard to aid federal and local law enforcement in combating the unexpected crisis on January 6th. Similarly, essential continuity of government evacuation plans were utilized amid the insurrection. For instance, congressional leaders were evacuated to Fort McNair, a U.S. Army post known as a continuity of government support site. So understanding all that went down during January 6th and alongside continuity of government's rich history, how can we ensure that continuity of government will be safeguarded in the post-insurrection and post-Trump era? Undeniably, January 6 showcased that it was both necessary and pivotal to not only maintain but improve continuity of government in policy and practices. So what solutions can America facilitate to ensure that continuity of government is maintained effectively? Throughout my research, I found some solutions that certain political actors and scholars had uplifted. One that I saw was forming a permanent barrier around the Capitol. It might sound far-fetched, but this idea does have its supporters. For instance, former Senate Sergeant at Arms Terry Gaynor, a member of the Capitol Task Force, and Bill Pickle recommended forming this physical barrier around the Capitol. Pickle even went further in his proposal, stating, "You have to ensure that the continuity of government will continue, that the Capitol and the White House are not destroyed." Pickle had said this in the recent aftermath of the Capitol, showcasing that politicians definitely want to maintain the program and just greater democracy. And then another alternative that I find pretty feasible is pushing for the government branches to collaborate and form sweep and essential reform to continuity of government. Like I said, it's definitely feasible, but we do have to consider the gridlock that is very rampant in Congress and the larger bureaucracy. Certain scholars like Norman Ornstein suggest reforming past continuity government policies like the 25th Amendment and the Presidential Succession Act of 1947, essentially modernizing them for the current era, as such past policies really emphasize international threats to our continuity of government rather than domestic internal threats. And then my final point from my essay is on the slide. I will read this. Ultimately, the insurrection serves as an eye-opening event for the United States. The day allows Americans, politicians and civilian alike, to reconsider the many plans and protocols within continuity of government and subsequently alter or expand them. These revisions, whether current or projected, will now be further all-encompassing, as they will be more cognizant of the serious threats to governance within the nation's borders. And I want to thank you guys for listening to this presentation. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I look forward to hearing more about it.
Okay, we have 3 papers that approach this topic in totally different areas. So when people say, well, why are you doing that? You know, who's interested? I said, well, there are so many different areas you can go in when you start talking about continuity of government, and we see that. So we have, oh, wow, we only have about 2 minutes to take some questions, comments. Let me see, somebody want to jump in first? Is Dr. Baptist still here? No, he was posting.
I can ask a question.
Okay,
Is that cool?
thank you.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, I don't know if it's I think Ms. McCrae, that term electoral refusal, I would recommend if it's a concept that you develop, coin a concept, even if you can write an op-ed on it so you can make sure it's your own, because once this video is posted on YouTube after the conference, it could be taken with someone. How do you resolve the electoral refusal problem? Let's say one example, it's difficult to get a John Lewis Act if the Senate's divided and the structural hurdles, but oftentimes that may be difficult to communicate to the broader young Black folks and everything like that. So how do you then resolve that issue if you have these structural impediments to getting legislation done, that's clashing with the need to get something done and the possible disillusionment that among young Blacks if you don't get anything done?
Yes, thank you for listening. Thank you for the question and the heads up. And it's something that, look, I wish I had the answer to, right? And so Dr. Shaw mentioned in the comment, like, protest politics is a form of politics. So people are engaging with it. I think it's just the turnout of the vote that we're seeing. And so whose problem is it, right? Like, what do we do? How do we get people interested? Is the fact that we're not more candidates who are more interesting and more exciting? Like, is that the issue, the candidate issue? Maybe we're not putting the best candidates up, like Joe Biden, seen as a moderate. People were not also a fan of Vice President Harris either. And so that's part of the issue. But I think especially with like intense polarization, how do we see this happening? And it's really still something that I'm reckoning with all the time. Like, we talked about this in class and I'm just like, what do we do about it? So I don't know. It's still something that's mind-boggling. If you have ideas, I'm happy to hear that.
Okay, we have run out of time, and I have been told by the committee that we're supposed to end on schedule. So I know these young people would like to hear from you and comments that you might have on their papers. So they would love to hear from you, and we can give you email addresses or whatever to keep in contact with them. Thank you all so much for your attendance. And I'll say congratulations to our 3 scholars who presented today. I feel good about the future of the profession. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.